Welcome to Inside's Economist's Mind, a podcast where economic thinking meets real-world impact. You're listening to our Career Conversation series, where we explore the journeys, challenges, and strategies that shape the careers of economists in Australia. Today's deep dive is all about mastering behavioral interviews at the ATO. If you're preparing for an economist or research analyst role in the public sector, this one's for you. We'll unpack the STAR method, walk through tailored examples, and show you how to align your experience with ATO values and expectations. Let's get into it.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Because behavioral interviews, they're really, really central to hiring in the Australian Public Service, the APS, people often call it. And the ATO, the Australian Taxation Office, well, there's certainly no exception. It's not just about, do you know your economic theory? Can you build a fancy model? They really want to dig into how you actually apply that knowledge,
Okay.
especially in situations that are, well, let's face it, often a bit messy, right? Situations where you're working with other people, maybe under pressure.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So let's unpack that a bit. Why this big focus on past behavior? It almost feels like they're, I don't know, trying to predict the future by looking backwards.
And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The whole idea, the premise is that what you've done before is, well, probably the best sign of how you'll act in similar situations down the track. For roles like Economist or Research Analyst at the ATO, they need people who can bring more than just the technical chops, those non-technical skills. People call them soft skills sometimes, but they're really fundamental. Things like how you work with others, how you solve problems on the fly. These need to sit alongside that rigorous economic thinking.
Right, right. The competencies. I saw the sources you shared mentioned some specific ones they really zoom in on. What are those key traits they're looking for?
Yeah, the big ones that keep coming up for these roles are integrity, analysis, teamwork, and problem solving. And if you think about the environment, it makes perfect sense. You're potentially dealing with really sensitive taxpayer information. Your analysis could feed into advice that shapes national policy. You're constantly working across different teams, maybe even different government departments. So integrity, that real commitment to doing the right thing, being honest, it's not just a nice to have. It's absolutely critical. It's about public trust, handling confidential stuff properly.
And analysis, well, that's kind of total stakes for an economist, isn't it? But I guess here it's about how you demonstrate it.
Exactly. It's not just can you do analysis, but is it rigorous? Can you defend it? Is it actually useful for the real world tax and economic questions the ATO deals with? Then you've got teamwork. ATO economists, they rarely work totally alone. You're going to be collaborating. Policy people, lawyers, data gurus, folks in other agencies, Treasury, Productivity Commission, you name it. So being able to, actually work well with people who might have very different backgrounds or ways of looking at things, that's super important.
Yeah, I can see that. And problem solving. I imagine that's pretty much a daily occurrence when you're grappling with, complex economic systems and just massive amounts of data.
Oh, absolutely. The economy doesn't stand still. Tax law is complicated. The data itself can throw curveballs. You will run into unexpected issues, things that don't match up, times when the textbook approach just doesn't quite cut it. So being able to tackle those problems logically, break them down, maybe think a bit outside the box, sometimes that's vital. So yeah, these four: integrity, analysis, teamwork, problem solving, they really form the foundation, the bedrock of what makes a good public service economist, especially in that specific ATO world.
That really clarifies. They're looking for the whole package, aren't they? The technical skills plus the character and the collaborative ability to actually use those skills effectively in their workplace. Okay, so we get why they ask these questions, probing into the past. Now, the big question: how do you answer them? How do you structure it so you're clear, you're concise, but you actually make an impact? The sources really hammer home the STAR method.
The STAR method, yeah. It's your best friend for these interviews, honestly. It gives you this simple framework, it's easy to remember, and it makes sure your answer covers all the bases. It stops you from, just rambling on, or worse, leaving out the really crucial bits. And STAR, it's an acronym, right, stands for situation, task, action, and result.
Okay, let's break that down component by component. What does each letter actually mean when you're sitting there crafting your answer?
Right, so you kick off with S for situation. First step is setting the scene. You need to describe the specific event or context you're going to talk about, what was going on, maybe who else was involved, roughly when did it happen, was it a uni project, a previous job, maybe even volunteer work, just enough detail, so the interviewer gets the picture. You don't want to get bogged down in loads of unnecessary backstory, but give them enough context to understand what you were facing.
Got it. So the context, the background, where it all happened.
Then T is for task. Here, you explain what your specific role was in that situation. What were your responsibilities? What exactly were you supposed to achieve? What was the goal you were aiming for? This really clarifies your personal mandate, what you were trying to get done within that scenario. It's like your mission statement for that particular story.
Okay, my specific job or objective within that situation makes sense.
Precisely. Then comes A for action. Now, this is arguably the most critical part. This is where you detail the specific steps that you and the emphasis is on you took. What did you actually do to handle the situation or complete that task? What decisions did you make? Even if it was a group effort, the focus has to be on your contribution. Use I statements. I analyzed, I proposed, I coordinated. This is where you lay out the evidence. Show them what skills you used. Be really specific about what you did and how you went about it.
Okay. So this is the show, don't just tell part. My direct actions, my input.
Exactly right. Don't just say, we solved the data issue. Say something like, I identified the inconsistencies, so I wrote a script in R to cross-validate the dataset against treasury figures, which highlighted the specific errors. The action needs to be something you actively performed. And finally, R is for result. You need to wrap it up by outlining the outcome. What happened because of your actions? Did you achieve the task? What were the positive effects? And importantly, this is also where you can mention what you learned from it all, especially if maybe the result wasn't perfect first time round. And whenever you can, quantify it. Put numbers on it if possible. Did you save time? Improve accuracy by a certain percentage? Finish ahead of schedule? Numbers add real weight.
Yeah, that quantitative part sounds important. And I like that point about learning. Even if things didn't go perfectly smoothly, framing the result around what you learned shows that adaptability, that growth mindset. That's valuable too, right?
Oh, massively valuable. Absolutely. The STAR method, it basically forces you into telling a complete little story. It's got a clear beginning, situation, task, a middle, action, and an end result. It stops you from giving those vague answers like, oh yeah, I'm a good team player. Instead, you provide concrete proof. Well, there was this situation task, so I did action, and the outcome was result, which shows how I collaborate effectively. It's all about specific, evidence-based examples.
This is fantastic, and the sources you shared have these brilliant sample questions and detailed STAR responses, really tailored to the kind of things an economist or analyst might actually face. Let's dive into those. Seeing STAR in action will really solidify it.
Yeah, these examples are pure gold for prep. They give you a really good feel for the level of detail and the kind of structure they're looking for.
Okay, first one. A classic interpersonal challenge. Question 1. Tell me about a time you had to work with a challenging colleague. And this isn't usually about personality clashes, right? More about professional differences.
Exactly. It's often about approach or methodology. So the sample response sets up a situation, working on a national construction sector forecast. The challenge. A colleague really favored a top-down approach looking at the big picture first, whereas our interviewee, the person answering, preferred a bottom-up econometric model building from the specifics. Both valid ways, but potentially leading to different results or friction.
Right, so the task wasn't just get the forecast done. It was specifically to integrate these different methods into one cohesive report for the clients. And crucially, to do that without causing friction, maintaining a good working relationship.
Yes, and the actions here really showcase that collaborative problem-solving skill. The person didn't just, dig their heels in or dismiss the colleague's view. First, they initiated a structured meeting. Proactive. Then, they made a point of acknowledging the strengths of the colleague's top-down method, showing respect. Smart move. Then, they proposed a practical way forward. Let's test both approaches side by side on some historical data, see where they differ, and then combine elements from each where they actually complemented each other. Build something stronger together.
That's a really mature way to handle it. It shows respect, focuses on the analytical goal, getting the best forecast, not just like winning an argument. That hits teamwork, communication, even analytical thinking, because you're evaluating methodologies.
Spot on. It's not just about playing nice, it's about constructively navigating technical disagreements. And the result? It reflects that success. They produced a robust forecast that was well received by clients, and importantly, the process actually improved their collaboration with that colleague significantly on later projects. So it's a win for the analysis and a win for the team dynamic.
That's a really strong example. Okay, let's switch gears. Question 2. Describe a situation where you had to make a difficult decision. These often involve tricky trade-offs, don't they?
They certainly do. This sample response is set during a big macroeconomic impact study looking at renewable energy projects, the difficult situation. Late in the game, they uncovered some data inconsistencies. Uh-oh. These inconsistencies threw doubt on some key inputs they were using, and fixing it properly might mean delaying the report's publication.
Ah, the classic dilemma. You've got a hard deadline from the client, but your analytical gut is telling you the data might be shaky. So the task was basically choosing meet the deadline with potentially iffy results or push back for accuracy.
Exactly. And the action taken here really highlights those core public service values, especially integrity and that analytical rigor. The interviewee decided to prioritize accuracy. That's a tough call when the clock's ticking. But they didn't just make the call alone. They consulted their team, talked through the implications, then, showing transparency, they communicated proactively with the client, explained the issue honestly, said why the delay was needed to ensure the data was solid, and then they did the work. They revalidated the key data points, digging into alternative reliable sources. They ran extra econometric checks just to be sure everything lined up.
Wow. Prioritizing accuracy, involving the team, being upfront with the client, and then actually doing the grunt work to verify.
Yeah.
Those actions screen integrity and thorough analysis.
They absolutely do. It shows you get that timeliness matters, but reliable, defensible analysis is just paramount, especially when your work might inform policy. And the result backs this up. The report was delivered, okay, maybe with a slight delay, just 2 days in this example, but crucially, it had high accuracy. And the validation came through. It received commendation specifically for its integrity and depth. This story is just perfect for showing you value analytical honesty over just, meeting a deadline no matter what.
That's a really powerful narrative for a public sector context. Okay, question 3. Give me an example of a time you took an alternative approach to solving a problem. This speaks to innovation, right? Thinking outside the standard Economist toolkit.
Precisely. This example comes from a PhD project looking at remittances the money migrants send back home. The situation was that the standard regression models just weren't cutting it. They kept failing to capture these important asymmetries, these sort of nonlinear patterns in the data. The usual tools weren't working.
So the task was pretty clear. You need to refine the model or find a new one that can actually capture those specific dynamics that the basic linear models were missing.
And the actions show real initiative and technical flexibility. The person didn't just keep banging their head against the wall with the old model. They went out, did the research, and implemented more advanced techniques. The example mentions threshold autoregression and asymmetric cointegration, fancy terms. But the point is they sought out tools specifically designed for those nonlinear relationships. They also mentioned using Stata and R to do it, which signals technical proficiency with key software. It shows a willingness to go beyond the basics and the skill to apply complex methods.
Yeah, that definitely speaks to analytical depth, problem solving by finding new tools, and technical skill.
Right. It shows you can recognize when the standard approach isn't enough and you've got the capability to find and use something better. And the result, it validated the whole effort. The revised model captured the economic behavior much, much more accurately. And the proof, it led to a publication in a peer-reviewed academic journal. That's a pretty solid outcome, offering external validation of the innovative approach.
Getting published is definitely strong evidence. Okay, question 4 tackles something tricky. Failure. Tell me about a time you failed and how you learned from it. How do you answer this honestly without shooting yourself in the foot? It's about accountability, I guess.
Absolutely. Accountability and that growth mindset. Being transparent about mistakes and showing you learned something is vital, especially in the public service. So the situation here is from early in someone's career, an industry role. They underestimated how long it would take to build a pretty complex forecasting dashboard for a client. Just misjudged the effort involved.
And the task was tight. Deliver this dashboard within 1 week. High pressure.
Yeah. So the action part needs honesty about the slip-up, then focus on the recovery. The interviewee admits they misjudged the time needed, specifically for data cleaning and model integration classic time sinks, right? This screw-up led to delays. But the crucial part, showing that accountability, is what they did next. They took ownership. No excuses. They communicated transparently with the client, explained what happened, requested an extension, and they showed commitment by working extra hours to get it done, ASAP.
Taking ownership, communicating proactively instead of hiding it. That's huge. It shows maturity and integrity.
Totally. Pointing fingers doesn't help. The question is about your role and your learning. And the results section here is almost entirely about the learning, which is exactly right for this question. They learned, okay, always factor in buffer time, learn to consult stakeholders earlier to get realistic estimates, and the lasting change, they adopted agile planning methods afterwards. That failure directly led to a permanent improvement in how they worked.
Turning a mistake into a better process, that's a great way to frame it. Shows self-awareness, adaptability. Okay, question 5 is about leadership. Even if you're not applying for a manager role, economists often lead projects, right? Describe a situation where you had to lead a team or project.
Yeah, project leadership is common. The situation here is coordinating a big forecast report, covering infrastructure and utility sectors in a previous job, involved pulling together analysis from different areas.
And the task was specific. Lead analysts who came from different backgrounds, maybe different expertise, different levels, and deliver one cohesive, integrated report.
The actions demonstrate really practical leadership skills. The person scheduled regular progress updates, keeping everyone on the same page. They assigned clear responsibilities, playing to people's strengths. They set shared milestones so everyone knew the deadlines. And they introduced a specific technical helper, version control, to manage edits smoothly when multiple people were working on it. Smart.
Those are concrete steps. Organization, clear communication, managing collaboration, speaks to teamwork and leadership, definitely.
It does. It's about structuring the work, supporting the team. And the result shows it worked. Report completed ahead of schedule. Bonus. It was praised for consistency and depth, meaning the integration piece was successful. And importantly, the process boosted team morale. Suggests the leadership style wasn't just effective, it was positive for the people too.
High-quality work, early delivery, and happy team. That's a strong leadership story. Now, communication. Hugely important for economists translating complex stuff. Question 6. Give me an example of how you have adapted your communication style to different audiences.
Very common scenario. The situation here is someone who regularly prepared reports for both technical folks and non-technical stakeholders. The example uses construction and energy sectors, but it could be anything. You've got fellow analysts, but also maybe execs or policy advisors.
And the task is key. Ensure clarity for everyone without sacrificing the analytical depth. Can't just dumb it down. The rigor needs to be there for those who need it.
Exactly. So the actions show a really deliberate, tailored approach. For the executives, they simplified the complex jargon, the econometric terms, used visual summaries, charts, dashboards, focused on actionable insights, the so what. But for the technical crowd, they included detailed technical annexes, all the modeling assumptions, data sources, methodology. It was all there for scrutiny, just separate from the main narrative.
That's a perfect illustration. Tailoring the message and the format directly shows that ability to translate complex info.
And the result confirms it worked. Both groups found it accessible and valuable. Mission accomplished. Even better, this clear communication led to increased client engagement. Shows that good communication doesn't just inform, it makes the analysis more useful, drives impact. Critical in public service where analysis has to feed into decisions.
So true. Analysis is only valuable if people understand it and use it. Okay, question 7. Tell me about a time when you used logic to solve a problem. This feels a bit different. Maybe less about a big process, more about thinking critically when something seems weird.
Yeah, it's about that analytical detective work, the situation. Forecasting transport infrastructure costs. The interviewee spots something odd, erratic trends and material price inputs in the data. The numbers just didn't feel right, didn't match historical patterns.
So the task becomes immediate. Verify these figures. You can't build a forecast on dodgy data, right?
Right. So the actions show this logical step-by-step investigation. They didn't just flag it and stop. They dug in. Performed time series decomposition looking for underlying patterns. Checked for seasonality, could that explain it? Crucially, they cross-verified the data externally, checked against industry indices, even contacted suppliers directly, applying logic and analytical methods systematically.
That's a great example. Using analytical tools plus external reality checks to test a hypothesis about the data. Pure problem solving driven by logic.
Exactly. Shows you don't just take data at face value. You question it, investigate it, and the result, it paid off. They identified actual reporting anomalies in the source data. They were able to correct them. And the payoff, it significantly improved the forecast accuracy. Using logic led directly to a better outcome.
Spotting and fixing data issues happens all the time. Super valuable skill. Question 8 is about delegation. Describe a time when you delegated work across a team. Important for teamwork and efficiency.
Yes. Situation again involves a joint report construction and energy outlook. needed to split the work fairly and effectively among 3 analysts.
And the task wasn't just random assignment. It was specifically about delegating based on the different strengths and expertise of each team member. Requires knowing your team.
And the actions show that thoughtful approach. They assign tasks based on individual expertise. Maybe one person knew construction data best, another knew energy modeling. They set clear expectations, what, when, how good, and they scheduled regular check-ins. Not micromanaging, but making sure everyone was on track, offering support if needed.
Good delegation is key for both leadership and teamwork, isn't it? Getting the right person on the right task, keeping the project moving, shows good judgment.
It does. Optimizes the team. And the result shows it worked. Project delivered on time. Output was high quality. And importantly, the team members appreciated the tailored assignments. Good for morale, good for engagement.
Project done well, happy team, win-win. Question 9 is another problem-solving angle. What was one time you encountered a problem and how you overcame it? Bit broader, maybe?
Yeah, slightly broader. Situation here is policy analysis doing an economic impact study for a new government policy. The problem: inconsistent and conflicting data coming from all sorts of secondary sources, reports, surveys, industry bodies, a very common headache in policy work.
Ah, yes, the messy data problem again. So the task was critical.
Yeah.
You needed reliable, consistent inputs for your big macroeconomic simulation model. Garbage in, garbage out, right?
Exactly. The model's credibility depended on sorting out the data, so the actions show persistence and smart data handling. The person triangulated the data, meaning they compared data points from multiple sources, government reports, industry pubs, surveys to find the most reliable figure or understand the discrepancies. They also used interpolation techniques to fill gaps logically. Shows technical skill in data manipulation.
That's real-world data wrangling. Shows tenacity, resourcefulness, and the technical skills to manage messy information. Problem-solving meets analytical skill.
It is. Shows you don't just give up when the data is imperfect. You find ways to make it work, understanding the limitations, and the result. They overcame the hurdle. The final model produced credible forecasts usable for the policy analysis. And a real sign of success, the methodology they developed to handle that specific data issue. It was adopted as a template for future projects facing similar challenges.
Nice. Solving your problem and creating a better way for others. Shows initiative, systemic impact. Okay, last one. Question 10. Can you provide an example of a successful project you led that resulted in increased revenue for the organization? This one sounds maybe more commercial.
It can be, yeah. Might be more relevant for parts of the ATO dealing with external clients, maybe fee-for-service work, or perhaps even modeling the revenue impact of compliance strategies. Getting more tax in the door is a form of revenue increase for the government, arguably. The situation described here is leading a project to revise a forecasting model for renewable infrastructure investments.
And the task was clearly linked to client value. Refine the model's projections to actively help external clients make better investment decisions. The revenue link comes from offering a more valuable service they'll pay for.
Exactly. And the action shows significant improvements. They revamped the core econometric model, a big analytical upgrade. They added real-time data feeds, making it more current. And they introduced interactive dashboards linking back to that communication skill, making complex results easier for clients to grasp and use.
Those are tangible actions that directly improve the product, the service being offered.
Precisely. Real enhancements. And the result directly answers the revenue question. The improvements were so good that several key clients upgraded their subscriptions for deeper access. This led to a measurable increase in revenue for that part of the organization. Clear, quantifiable impact linking analytical work to a commercial outcome.
Wow. Okay, going through those 10 examples with the star structure really brings it to life. You can see how experiences from uni, from industry, whatever, can be shaped to hit those core ATO competencies. It makes behavioral questions feel much less intimidating.
It really does, doesn't it? And the big takeaway for anyone listening isn't just memorizing these specific stories. It's understanding how each one uses situation, task, action, result to prove things like integrity, analysis, teamwork, problem solving, by showcasing concrete actions and measurable results. The real preparation is thinking about your own experiences, maybe they're different scenarios, that's fine, and structuring them using STAR, that's the best prep you can do.
Okay, so we've got the technique down. Let's zoom out a bit now. The sources really stress understanding the context, the ATO environment itself. Why is that so crucial?
Because the ATO isn't just, any old government department. It has a really specific and, frankly, massive role in national economic policy and how the country runs financially. They need pretty sophisticated economic analysis for a whole range of things. It's not just about collecting tax.
Right. So what are some of those specific areas where economists are working inside the ATO, according to the sources?
Well, several key ones. Revenue forecasting is huge, predicting how much tax money the government is likely to collect. That feeds directly into the federal budget, very high stakes. Then there's tax gap estimation. That's figuring out the difference between the tax that should be paid under the law and what's actually collected. It helps them understand where compliance is weak and target their efforts.
And I know they've been doing more in behavioral economics, too, trying to understand why people comply or don't.
Yes, exactly. Behavioral economics is a growing area, using insights from psychology, economics to understand taxpayer decisions. How can they design policies or communications to, nudge people towards compliance? And related to that is economic compliance modeling, using economic theory and data to figure out compliance risks and develop strategies to encourage people to pay the right amount voluntarily.
So forecasting the nation's income, measuring the gap, understanding behavior, designing better systems, that's a pretty broad and critical set of tasks for economists.
It absolutely is. Their work has direct consequences for government funding, for policy design, for maintaining trust in the whole tax system. Understanding that context helps you frame your own skills and experience in a way that shows you get it.
And connecting back to those ATO values, integrity, collaboration, innovation, accountability, excellence.
Yeah.
How do they really play out in these specific ATO functions? Why are they so important there?
Oh, they're woven into everything. Integrity, well, we touched on that. Handling sensitive data, providing impartial advice that affects millions, honesty and ethical conduct are non-negotiable. Collaboration is essential because no one person has all the answers. Analyzing complex tax laws or forecasting revenue involves policy folks, lawyers, data scientists, maybe treasuries, the RBA. You have to work together.
And innovation. Seems like tax might be seen as traditional, but I guess it's changing fast.
It really is. Think about the digital economy, global companies, new investment types, using massive new data sets. The ATO needs innovation to keep up, developing new models, applying those behavioral insights, finding smarter ways to use data. That's where innovation comes in. And accountability. Everything you do needs to stand up to scrutiny. Your forecasts have to be defensible. Your estimates need clear methodology. Your advice needs to be transparent about assumptions. You're accountable for the quality and integrity of your work, which underpins that public trust.
It really paints a picture of needing economists who are not just technically skilled, but also deeply principled and collaborative. Okay, let's get practical. What does the day-to-day actually look like for an economist or research analyst there? What are they doing?
Well, based on the sources, it's a mix, but tends to involve a lot of quantitative work, writing, and talking to people. You might be spending time conducting economic impact assessments. So if there's a proposed change to tax law or new policy, you'd model how that might affect the economy or specific industries or different groups of taxpayers.
Sounds pretty involved. What about the forecasting side?
Yeah, that's a big part too. Forecasting key economic indicators, things like GDP growth, inflation, wages, jobs. Because these are the drivers of the tax base.
Yeah.
So you need to stay on top of economic trends, use different forecasting models and techniques that feeds directly into those big revenue forecasts we mentioned.
And data analysis must be constant.
Oh, constantly. A huge chunk of the job is performing deep data analysis. You're using public data, like from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, ABS. Stat gets mentioned a lot. But crucially, you're also working with the ATO's own massive detailed tax records. Plus, maybe data from Treasury, other places. So your skills with statistical software, data wrangling, that's essential.
And writing it all up, I assume?
Yep. And contributing to reports. ATO economists often contribute to interagency reports or provide analysis for policy briefs, working with Treasury, Finance, the Productivity Commission, that collaboration piece again.
So it's this blend of hard analysis, staying current with the economy, getting your hands dirty with complex data, and then being able to communicate what you found clearly, often working with others.
That sums it up pretty well. Strong technical skills, absolutely, but also the ability to apply them to messy, real-world policy questions and explain your findings in a way that non-economists can understand and use.
Now, the sources also mention APS work level standards. That's the Public Service Job Classification System. How does that connect to interview expectations for these roles?
Right, the APS levels. They matter because they signal the expected level of responsibility, complexity, and autonomy. Economist roles at the ATO usually fall between APS 5 or APS 6 up to Executive Level 1 or EL1.
Okay, so what's the difference in expectations between, say, an APS 56 and an EL1? What would they be doing?
Generally speaking, at the APS 5 or 6 level, you're really building your foundational analytical skills. You're doing a lot of the data handling, the cleaning, maybe running models under guidance, providing technical support to more senior people, drafting sections of reports. You're executing the analysis, learning the ropes, usually with a fair bit of supervision.
And EL1 is a definite step up from that.
Oh yeah, it's a significant jump. At EL1, you're expected to take on more complexity and independence. You might be leading specific analytical projects yourself, from start to finish. You could be coordinating analysis across different teams, maybe even liaising with other agencies. And a key difference: you're likely presenting your complex findings directly to senior executives, influencing decisions. Much more autonomy, stakeholder management, strategic thinking.
Ah, okay. So the underlying behavioral competencies, integrity, analysis, teamwork, they're the same. But the examples you use in your star stories need to match the level you're going for. The complexity, the scope, the independence shown needs to ramp up.
Exactly. That's a really critical point. If you're aiming for an EL1 role, telling a story about how you cleaned a data set really well, while good for an APS 56, might not cut it.
Right.
For EL1, they want to hear about that time you managed a complex project with tricky stakeholders, or navigated major data gaps to deliver crucial policy advice, or briefed a deputy commissioner effectively on a technical issue. Scale your stories to the job level.
That's vital advice. Tailor the level of your examples. And speaking of tailoring, the sources suggest framing examples using sectors relevant to the ATO's work.
Yes, if you can connect your experience to the kinds of economic areas the ATO cares about, it just makes your answers more relevant, helps the interviewer see the fit. The sources mention things like tax reform analysis, obviously, analyzing superannuation trends, huge implications for tax and retirement policy, modeling GST or excise taxes.
And didn't some of the sample star stories touch on relevant sectors, like housing affordability and construction,
Yeah.
and renewable energy incentives?
Exactly. Those examples use scenarios linked to construction, economics, and energy policy, both areas with significant tax implications or government involvement that the ATO would be interested in. So if your background touches on those, or maybe labor markets, small business issues, international trade, even behavioral insights from completely different fields, think about how you can frame your star stories within those contexts. It shows you've thought about their world.
Okay, this is all coming together. Let's quickly revisit those core competencies one last time, pulling together the specific what they look for, points, and tips from the sources.
Good idea. Let's lock them in. First, analytical thinking. What they want is evidence. You use data and evidence rigorously to generate insights and sound advice. The tip? Showcase your modeling experience. Detail the how of your analysis in your star stories.
Next, communication. Key thing is translating technical complexity for different people. The tip? Practice explaining things for different levels. Expert, manager, executive. Show you can make economics clear and relevant.
Teamwork. They look for ability to collaborate effectively, especially across different teams or agencies. The tip: don't shy away from sharing conflict resolution stories, like that challenging colleague example. Show you can work constructively with others.
Adaptability. Things change: policy, data, the economy. They need people who can handle changing circumstances. The tip: show flexibility in how you make decisions or approach problems when things go off script. The failure example and the data inconsistency example fit well here.
And finally, integrity. Foundational. They need people who will uphold APS values: honesty, impartiality, accountability. The tip: be transparent, especially about failures or tricky situations. The difficult decision example, prioritizing accuracy, is a prime demonstration.
It's so much clearer now how those abstract competency names translate into actual behaviors they're listening for in your answers. It's about the evidence in your actions.
Precisely. And speaking of actions, being able to actually do the work requires familiarity with the tools of the trade. The sources list some common software and data sources.
Right, the tools. They mention statistical software like Stata, R, Excel, Power BI, and SAS.
Yeah, knowing these, or at least some of them, shows you have the technical toolkit. R and Stata are workhorses for econometrics and government. Excel's fundamental. Power BI is big for visualization, dashboards. SAS pops up too. Mention how you use these tools in your star examples. I used R2, or I built a dashboard in Power BI that showed, adds that technical credibility.
And the data sources: ABS Stat, ATO tax statistics, and NAO reports.
Knowing these shows you understand the landscape. ABS Stat is the go-to for official stats. ATO's own tax data is obviously core to their work, and ANEO reports the Audit Office give insights into government performance and data use. Just mentioning awareness shows you've done your homework.
So it's this combination then. Strong analytical grounding, knowing the tools and data, and demonstrating those crucial behavioral skills through concrete past examples.
That really nails it. The behavioral interview is where you weave all that together.
Okay, we have covered a huge amount today. The why of behavioral questions, the STAR method structure, walk through loads of examples, discuss the ATO context, role levels, tailoring answers, the competencies, the tools. As we wrap up, what are those final killer tips from the sources for listeners getting ready for these interviews?
Okay, 3 key takeaways. First, consciously try to match your examples to the ATO's core values. As you tell your story, think, does this show integrity, collaboration, accountability, excellence? Make that connection clear, subtly, or explicitly.
Smart. Aligning with their values shows you're a good cultural fit.
Exactly. Second, be prepared, but be natural. Yes, practice your STAR stories, know the details, but don't memorize a script. You want to sound like you, having a conversation. Authenticity matters. They want to hire a person, not a robot.
Good point.
Yeah.
Practice, don't recite.
Right. And third, quantify your impact whenever you can. Use metrics, use numbers in the result part of STAR. Reduce time by 15%, improved accuracy by 5 points, handled a budget of X dollars. Quantifiable results are just more concrete, more believable, more memorable.
Quantify, quantify, quantify. Makes the impact real. This whole deep dive really clarifies that preparing for ATO behavioral interviews isn't just about interview technique. It's about reflecting deeply on your experiences and learning to articulate them clearly, showing you've got the skills and the values they need.
Couldn't agree more. And that skill, being able to clearly structure and communicate complex situations you've handled, laying out the challenge, your actions, the result, the learning that's valuable, way beyond just getting the job right.
Absolutely. It's fundamental to being an effective economist in policy, isn't it? Your analysis needs transparency, clear methods, findings communicated with integrity. The STAR method, in a way, it's not just an interview tool, it's a framework for explaining complex professional experiences, essential for building trust, driving evidence-based work in government.
Exactly. It ties right back to where we started, economic thinking meeting real-world impact, proving you can handle the real world's complexity, the messy data, the difficult colleagues, the tough decisions with integrity and analytical skill. That's what they're looking for. Nailing the STAR method shows you've got that foundation.
A really insightful way to frame it. Thanks so much for walking us through all this today. It's been incredibly helpful.
My pleasure. Hopefully it leaves listeners feeling a lot more confident about putting the best foot forward in those applications and interviews. Good luck to everyone preparing.
You've been listening to Inside's Economist's Mind. Join us next time for another deep dive.